In the previous video, we discussed the application of the three-step method. We look at the influence of the $1,200 stimulus checks upon the market for pizza. Okay, we said you can pick any market you are interested in. For example, auto market, or market for beverage, okay, or market for online games. Okay, we just arbitrarily pick the pizza market as an example. Okay, and this is actually the first time in this course we discussed a fiscal policy, okay, or the influence of a fiscal policy. Okay. So more specifically here, the fiscal policy is the tax return policy or tax credit policy. Okay. Now, you would find that these kind of the aggressive fiscal policies, by that we mean, they actively use the fiscal tools, including government spending and taxes, to affect the overall economy. Okay, and these kind of the aggressive fiscal policies are very popular in Washington, D.C. Okay, but we also heard, some critics of these fiscal policies. They always argue that, these policies are not really as effective as we were told by politicians. Okay, now their logic reasoning is, if these fiscal policies are effective, then we should not see any economic recession in our life. Okay, so what they're saying is, if $1,200 stimulus check is not good enough, we can give you more, okay, and we can boost the demand and increase the price on the market. Eventually, the firms would keep the same level of the quantity supplied, if not more. Okay, then if the firm keeps producing like before, they won't lay off people. Okay, so the unemployment rate won't go up, and because people are not getting laid off, so their paycheck doesn't get cut, they will continue spending, so the economy would be okay, would doing fine. Okay. However, in reality, we see economic recessions almost every decade. Okay, in some decades we see twice. So that's why they believe that the effectiveness of these policies are really a big question mark. Okay, and now here in this video we're gonna briefly talk about in this specific case how or what factors could lead to the ineffectiveness of these tax break policy. Okay. Now, we have to do this step by step. Okay. Now, the first thing we said is, when we go back and look at our three-step methods, okay, we're trying to figure out where we went wrong. Okay. Now, the income goes up by $1,200. This is a fact. This must be true, right? And we did receive the $1,200 check. And then an increase in income leads to an increase in demand. Is this true? Or there might be some other possibilities. So when we receive $1,200 stimulus check, what we could do is, of course, we could spend on pizza, we could spend on other things, right? Like what we said, online games, cars, even education, a lot of things. But in general, what we could do is we could spend, right? But we could also save, okay? Because nobody is able to force us to spend. Okay, and you would find that for most households across the country, they would spend a significant portion of these $1,200, but they would still save a fraction of it, right? So here, that means an increase from an increase in income to an increase in demand for pizza. This relationship, we need to put a big question mark here, okay? Because people could save. Now, suppose people save most or even every dollar of these $1,200, then demand won't go up. There's no rightward shift of the demand curve, right? So we won't be able to see shortage, and the price would stay the same. And of course, the profit is going to be the same, so the quantity supply will stay the same. Okay. So here we have to be very careful about, when people receive the $1,200, what are they going to do? Okay. Now let's think about, back in March 2020, when we start learning more and more about this COVID-19 thing, the virus. Okay, most of us were still trying to figure out what's really going on, right? We don't have enough information. We don't have the capability to understand a lot of these, medical studies in public health crisis. Okay, and but compared to us, the government did have both. It has the access to data. So if they want to know, how many patients admitted to the hospital because of COVID-19, how many patients are staying in ICU, okay, and the death toll for each day, right? They have a lot of information, way more than what I just mentioned. And they also have a lot of public health experts, right? Like Dr. Fauci. It's just one of them. So they can process all of this data and they can make their judgment. Okay. But for us, we don't really know what is going on. We're trying to figure out, but we don't really know. Okay. So when we learn this news, okay, like the government says, after we looking at all of this information, we decide to give each taxpayer $1,200. What would you think about this? How is this government announcement affect our judgment about the overall economy? All right. Another example I can give you is back in 2007, 2008. That's the most recent financial crisis, right? So at the beginning, if you remember, it was the bankruptcy of Lehman Brothers and AIG, right? And we start learning from the TV and online sources that these companies, these big investment banks on the Wall Street messed up, right? But again, for most average households living on the Main Street, we did not really know what was going on the Wall Street, okay? But compared to us, the government has the access to the data, okay? Because AIG and Lehman Brothers and some other big banks asking the government to bail them out. So they have to submit their financial information, data, reports to the government, okay? So that they could convince the government that the bailout is necessary. And the government also have a lot of experts. Okay, actually, a lot of people working in the Treasury Department, they worked in these investment banks before. Okay, So once they process all of this information, they come out and tell us that they give us up to $400 per person. So I'm talking about the previous one, not the current one. Okay, I think that was back in the summer of 2009. The government decided to give each taxpayer up to $400. Okay, now what's the people's response to this? Again, I would suggest you to pause the video and think about it. Okay? Actually, when people learn about this, it becomes more, the whole market becomes more panicked. Okay? Because we don't really know what was going on. And then we learn the government is going to give us that much money. If the situation is not that bad, why would a government give so many, like billions of dollars back to the taxpayers, right? So the situation must be very worse. Okay, now let's look at this. What I just talked about is the logic reasoning, right? Let's see if the real world data supports what we just said. Okay, so what we're looking at here is the personal saving rate for the United States. Okay, and we're talking about from 1980 all the way to the recent years. Now, I would like to drive your attention to these shaded areas. These are the recessions. What we find on this chart is during the recessions, the personal saving rate shoots up. Okay, so every time people save more during the recessions. Now, one reason is because during the recessions, our jobs are less secure. Okay, there are more uncertainties going on out there, so we would like to save more just in case, right? But what's more important is, during the recessions, when government made these announcements, they gave a lot of money back to us. It could, their original goal is to help the market cool down, right? And trying to convince us, it's not that bad, and we're giving the money back to you guys, so you don't have to worry about, if you lose your job, you're going to lose everything, right? So you can still have something to spend. But again, simply because of the announcement itself, it could make the market more panic. Okay, so if people becomes more panic, then they're gonna stop spending. They're gonna save more. That's why we see these spikes of the saving rate during the recession period. Okay, this is actually a lesson we learned in history. British ruling India. Okay, back then, the British governor found that there are a lot of Cobra snakes in India. So he came up with this bounty program or cash rewarding program. He said that, for the farmers, if you turn in a dead cobra snake, and you're going to receive the cash, okay, in return. So as you could imagine, once he made this announcement, all the farmers are going to the mountains and trying to catch cobra snakes. Okay, but after a while, the farmers realize that it becomes harder and harder to catch a cobra. Okay, and then they start breeding or raising the snakes in their field. Okay, and then the British governor found that, oh, this is not what I want, right? So he suspended the bounty program. And once he suspended the program, the farmers are not going to receive money, right? So they freed all the cobra snakes. So by the end of this story, the number of the cobra snakes did not really reduce. It's probably even increased. Okay, so again, from this lesson, what we learn is one of the most important principles we learn in chapter 1. People respond to incentives. Okay, so when the policymakers come up with a fiscal policy, or later we're going to talk about monetary policies, you have to factor in what's people's response. Okay? In this case, if your goal is to help the market calm down, and then you come up with a big policy, it may not work.